while to load. I think according to this, it is streaming live, but I always just wait a few seconds to make sure it. Oh, man. And I need to turn off my volume. Please don't start. All right. Perfect. So hello, everyone. Welcome to the Black Kids White Coats YouTube channel. We are live. So today we have the psychiatry session, and it's going to be a party. As you know, my name is Lillian. I'm one of the co-hosts of M4 with the Black Kids White Coats YouTube channel. I'm going to have Nelson introduce himself.
What's up, everybody? I'm Nelson. For those who don't know, I'm a recent graduated fourth-year medical student going into radiology and a co-host of Black Kids White Coats.
Nice. All right, thank you. And today we have some lovely, lovely guests. I am so excited for this session. It has been fun overall so far, and I'm thankful to all of you guys who are speaking, as well as the audience who is out here listening and gathering this information. Like, you guys are on top of your stuff. So let's just get right into it. So we have Nicholas, who's going to NYU, Kiana, who's going to University of Rochester, and Courtney, who's going to Johns Hopkins for psychiatry. So y'all did well. Hey, we're gonna just start off talking about your journey through medical school, your journey before that, how you got interested in medicine, how you got through medical school, and all of that stuff. What has been your journey so far, essentially? And Kiana, we can start off with you.
Okay. So my name is Kiana. I currently attend Edward Via College of Osteopathic Medicine, the Virginia campus. I graduate in 8 days. So I'm looking forward to that. I guess I'll start off with a quick fun fact about myself. I ran my first half marathon without training for it, and don't recommend that to anyone, but I did it. My body was not happy with me after, but it was a really fun race. My girlfriend was kind of like, hey, let's run a half marathon together. And I was like, sure. But the training part just didn't go my way, but it was fun. So that's just a quick fact about me. So I am a non-traditional medical student. I was that little girl that always wanted to become a doctor, but unfortunately, I was also that little girl that never saw any physicians that looked like her. So I didn't believe that I could actually become a doctor. So kind of just went on with life. I guess this really started hitting me once I entered into undergraduate years because it was time to choose a major. And I went in as a pre-med, and I was going to do a doctor of physical therapy program because I figured, okay, well, I'll still get that title of doctor because maybe that's what I'm going for, but I didn't know. And while I was in the program, there were no none of my peers looked like me. So I still thought, oh, well, maybe Black people aren't supposed to be doctors. Didn't feel the passion with physical therapy. So I ended up changing majors, changed undergraduate institutions, and started doing sports science because I was a track and field athlete. That kind of resonated with me. So exercise physiology kind of made sense. I'm grateful that I made that change because when I was doing my internship right before graduation, I did my internship at a large medical center in New York. And I worked alongside an exercise physiologist, but saw so many physicians of color, Black, Hispanic, and it was just an amazing, empowering place for me to be in. And I was like, oh, well, maybe I can do this. I actually landed my first job at that same medical center. So now I was surrounded by them every single day for a few years. And I was like, you know what, I'm gonna pursue this dream. I'm just gonna go for it. It wasn't that easy though, because I didn't know what to do. I ended up going to my pre-medical advisor at the school that I graduated from and told him about my interest in medicine. And he just told me that I would never become a physician because I got a C in organic chemistry and that I needed to just continue as an exercise physiologist. And at the moment I was like, oh, it's like that. So I said, okay, well, I guess I'll just do this on my own, and ended up using Pre-Med Advisor Google on my journey, and made a lot of mistakes along the way. And we can talk about that stuff later. But eventually found some great mentors who helped me carve out my path, and got accepted into a few medical schools. And here I am today.
All right, Courtney, would you like to go next?
I'm Courtney. I am not currently a medical student. I graduated in 2015. I'm, I guess, the non-traditional route then. I did 2 years of general surgery training after taking a gap year, actually, and working for IBM with the Watson robot in bioinformatics. And then after the 2 years of surgery, I was like, oh, yeah, this isn't for me. And fortunately, when I was in medical school, I liked psychiatry and surgery, which everyone says is a weird combination, but I think it's actually more common than most people think of initially. And so I did this thing where I pivoted, and I decided that surgery wasn't for me. I'm going to pursue psychiatry. So then I had to figure out how I was going to make myself look good for psychiatry, because everything was surgery. And I'd graduated medical school 3 years before that. So I did research for a year, and then I ended up matching to Johns Hopkins.
Okay, and last but not least, Nicholas.
Yes, everyone. So I guess I'm more of a traditional student. I, similar to everyone else, I decided I wanted to go into medicine as a child. And at the time, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to do anesthesia, but I quickly found out that wasn't for me. So coming out of high school, I entered the Sophie Davis program, which is a combined BSMD track, and followed that all the way through. And as of, I think, 2 weeks ago, I graduated from there as a part of the first class of the King School of Medicine, and going into psychiatry at NYU. Yeah, I mean, there's not many interesting parts to the story like everyone else. Just
Yeah, sure. I guess to follow up on that, Nicholas, can you talk a little bit more about why you chose the BSMD program versus just getting your bachelor's degree and then the medical degree?
Yeah, sure. So the BSMD program was actually something that was brought to my attention by my dad. Kind of maybe like a year after I originally told him I wanted to be a doctor. Someone told him about this program. He brought it to me and thought it was like, oh, it's a quick way to save some money, and you'll spend less time doing this whole thing. And at the time I looked at it and I was like, yeah, I'll save a year, and sure. So I applied, and then I looked into it more and more. But I think what ultimately made me decide to do it was the environment that the program itself provided. When I went there versus other colleges I had gotten into, seeing what other pre-med tracks looked like, and then seeing the air at this program I was going into, it just felt more supportive, and there was less of that competitive nature, whereas it was kind of already understood that everyone is accepted into med school as long as we all make it through. So it was a lot more collaborative environment versus the traditional cutthroatness that pre-med programs can be.
Forgot to mention that I went there as well.
And can you talk a little bit about why you decided to do that?
Pretty much the same reasons that Nicholas mentioned. I had a cousin who went to the program and graduated, I think, the year prior to me starting, and he was always a role model for me. So I pursued it. You didn't have to take an MCAT to get in, so that was a plus. And again, you were guaranteed the spot in a medical school. So it made sense. And it's for minorities in medicine, to try to get underrepresented minorities into medicine, serving people that are underserved. So that message also resonated with me.
Awesome. And just to clarify, can you define what the degree is? I realize we didn't do the definition of it, but it looks like it's a year shorter. But if you can talk a little bit about that, just for pre-meds who are looking into that kind of approach.
Sure. So yeah, it's 7 years. You do 3 years undergrad and you graduate with a BS in biomedical sciences, and then you immediately transition into what is now the CUNY School of Medicine, where you would earn your MD degree.
Okay, awesome. And then Courtney, I know, everyone has a different story, but can you talk about why you found, or how you found out that surgery wasn't for you?
Yeah, that was a rude awakening. I think so. One of the reasons why I chose surgery in the first place was because I like using my hands. I like being able to, instantly fix something, which is fun, or create things with my hands. Um, and as a third year medical student, I had a great experience in surgery. And I think so often we let our third year experience dictate what we like and what we don't like, which, yes, that's what you have to go off of. However, the team you're on from 1 month to another month, from one institution to another institution, could be totally different, even if it's in the same field. I know that my surgery rotation as a third year was great, but it was not the same as residency. So just the environment wasn't as forgiving of being a human being as I would have liked it to be. And also, I don't know, I just didn't see any attendings as a resident that I was like, oh yeah, I want to be like that. I want to have that kind of lifestyle. So I made the decision to switch, and I think I made the right choice.
Awesome. And then can we just talk a little bit about exposure? Did you guys get exposure to psychiatry before medical school, M1, M2 year, or was it like during your M3 year when you went through rotations, or later? And we can start off with Kiana.
So my first exposure with psychiatry was actually during M3 clerkships. I went into my third year very open. I thought I was going to be a pediatrician. But I said, you know what, I'm going to be a pediatrician, but I'm still going to go into all of these rotations with an open mindset, right? So I did that. Years going by, psychiatry was one of my last rotations. And once I entered into that rotation, I was like, what am I feeling? Like, why am I so excited about going in today? Why am I so excited to go home and study and learn more? And I looked at really how I felt and examined it. And I was like, I think I like psychiatry more than peds. And at that moment, I started to evaluate all of my rotations and really examined how I felt, what I liked about them, what I didn't like, and just left me at a place where I was like, okay, well, maybe psychiatry is what I enjoy doing. I think there's a great variety of patients. You can make great connections with patients, and it's really a misunderstood population of people, and the stigma, especially in the Black community, the Hispanic community, and I'm also finding out now within the Asian community, it's really, the stigma is real. People think mental health is, people that have mental health issues are sort of like lower class. And it's like, no, they're regular people. Mental health is real. And just being able to be a part of this environment to help destigmatize the field is something that I'm really looking forward to. I really solidified psychiatry though once I did an AI during my fourth year rotation. It was my first one, and I was so excited that I was able to get one, because by the time that I applied for audition rotations in psychiatry, they were all filled up, and I just happened to get one that started 7 days after they sent me the email that I got accepted. So it was just like a blessing for me. And once I got onto that rotation, it really solidified what I want to do in psychiatry. And that was how I entered into the field.
about you, Courtney?
Sorry, what was the question again? How I
The
chose
exposure to psychiatry.
so my exposure was probably just the third year clerkship, and I actually loved it. I found that, again, it was psychiatry and surgery, and I ended up picking psychiatry, surgery, because part of the stigma of psychiatry. I know my family probably wasn't as understanding, so that was my exposure in medical school. And then in order to give myself more exposure to psychiatry so that I can actually match, I did research in the gap time that I had after I stopped doing surgery to, now. I joined a lab at Mount Sinai, Beth Israel, and they focused on suicide research and trying to define a syndrome that would accurately capture someone who's at risk of imminent suicide. So that was my exposure. It was really good. I learned that I loved research. I got to present a poster. I was a finalist on my poster, and I'd never done a poster in my life. I relearned how to use SPSS and do analysis. It's like, wow, I didn't know I could do this. This is
It says that is real. That is not easy.
No.
Oh.
very frustrating, but good, great nonetheless. So that was my exposure to psychiatry.
What about you, Nicholas?
My exposure is pretty much like during third year clerkship and fourth year electives that I had taken. Prior to third year, I kind of came in, I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do, but I knew I had an interest in working with an addiction population, which kind of narrowed me down to like psychiatry and some primary care work. So I went into all those rotations with a very open mind, but I guess what really drew me in about psychiatry was just like the group of people you get to work with, both colleagues and patients, how much time we get to spend with our patients, and the kind of impacts that I saw that I didn't necessarily see in other fields of medicine. It was very long-term relationships that I liked, that you got the opportunity to build within psychiatry.
Okay. And I guess since you all kind of learned a little later, do you guys know of any programs that expose you to psychiatry like now, like looking back? It's just if not, that's fine, we can move on. But just if there are any resources that you guys know of that people can look into if they're interested in psychiatry.
I don't personally.
Mm-hmm.
I know, I believe through the APA, you can apply for electives they have for like rising fourth year students.
Okay.
I don't know how that's working this year in particular with everything going on, but I know generally they have opportunities for students to kind of get involved there. They also offer scholarships to attend any of the conferences for students, for any med students. So if you know earlier that that's something you might be interested in, it's a good way to kind of go to a conference for free, and they'll pay for flight and travel and stuff like that. You can get exposure like that.
Okay. All right. And we also have a question from the chat kind of talking about, is psych the new derm? And what are your thoughts about that? Anyone can start.
I was gonna say just no.
That's the first time I've ever heard that. I would say no. I think psychiatry has definitely become more popular over the last few years. Is it the new derm? I don't think so, though.
I feel like they might be getting at like, compensation and lifestyle. That's what I'm thinking. And the competitiveness of it.
Okay.
That's the vibe I'm getting from the question, but they would have to clarify, I guess. But yeah.
Well, I think psychiatrists have great lifestyles compared to some other specialties. I really think there's a great life-work balance there for sure. And the compensation is pretty good too, based upon the amount of work that you're doing. So I would say, sure, yeah, it's the new derm.
Like if you say it that way. Oh man. And then someone had a follow-up question. How do you know, because you guys talked about exposure, and I think Nicholas, you touched on like why psych for you, but how do you know that psych is for you? Like, sure, it's like a great lifestyle, great compensation, but when you go into it, like, how do you, like, making sure you're not chasing the money, chasing the lifestyle, how do you know like this is what I want to do for the rest of my life? And then anyone can start in terms of this.
So some advice I got during my third year that I think really helped me make the decision was try to pick a specialty where you love the everyday work that you do. And this is something I think the other speakers also talked on. Like, you shouldn't be going to specialty for like those super rare cases that you see, or like the 1 in a million diagnosis that you might have seen on your rotation, but kind of the mundane, everyday, day-to-day of the job. And that you can get a vibe for kind of like talking to residents you work with, talking to attendings you work with, and like really looking into the future, or as best as you can, looking into the future and trying to see what it is.
I guess this kind of goes back to exposure, the exposure question. And when I was in the bachelor portion of the BSMD program, I honestly, psychiatry was not even a thing for me. I didn't think, oh, I'm going to go to Sophie Davis and become a psychiatrist. Like, no. I didn't know any psychiatrists, nothing like that. But I do remember after transitioning to the MD part and going to New York Medical College, and then having my clerkship rotation, I remember thinking back to the classes that we had to take as part of the core undergraduate curriculum. And I remember that I loved philosophy. I loved Psychology 101, loved those courses. And it really didn't click when I was in Sophie Davis that, I could use that and become a psychiatrist and practice some of those principles. So when I realized that I could do that, I was like, oh, psychiatry might be really cool. And then another thing that I looked at in some of the psychiatrists that I saw was what their careers looked like. And so many people that I look up to have like a plethora of things that they've done. They've been in academia, they've been in politics, they've been in policy, they have their own private practice, they work in the hospital, they work, at home and see people, in telepsych. There's so many things that you can do, and there's so many initiatives that you can be a part of. You could work on health disparities and mental health disparities. You could be involved in pretty much anything, and there's a mental health component to so many things. And that's one of the reasons why I was like, oh, I'm definitely with this. This is for me. I'm a people person. Love getting to know and understand people, what their motives are, what shapes how they are, what traumas they might have had, how that makes them who they are now. So those are all things that kind of came together from, starting undergraduate education and learning about those like 101 courses in behavior all the way till, doing research and matching.
And for me, I would say I piggyback everything that was said already. But personally, for me, I really looked at the fields I was looking for the specialty where I felt like I would be able to have the most impact in. I felt like psychiatry was just that field. When I was on my rotations, it kind of felt right. And just seeing how misunderstood the patient population was, it really just resonated with me. Just growing up, and especially like in going to like Black churches, I realized that there's really a disconnect within some cultures. Like, I think I experienced and met a lot of people early on in life that were depressed, but it was like, we just got to pray it out of you, that were probably psychotic. And it was like, we just got to get that demon out of you. And sometimes people think they need more than a prayer. I think God works in mysterious ways, yes, but I think sometimes people need medical attention too. So for me, just being a part in the psychiatric world will just allow me to provide a lot of education. One of my passions is within the Black church community. So that's one area where I really want to work on and just educate like ministers within the fields to just recognize their congregants that may have deeper issues.
Awesome. And a follow-up question to all of this. Someone had a question about neurology versus psychiatry. Did you guys ever consider that neurology? And what advice would you have for someone who's torn between neurology and psychiatry? Anybody have any input to that?
So I actually don't have any input for that. So for my undergrad, so for my medical school clerkships, we did not have a neurology rotation. So I didn't get exposure in neurology. So I can't give you input. So
I wasn't considering neurology, but I did have a very close friend who was actually trying to decide between neurology and psychiatry for a while. Ironically, he went into neither, but I can kind of tell you what he did. So to decide between the two, he tried to get as much exposure as he could and just talk to people within the field and kind of see what their day-to-day life is. It was interesting to me to see that neurology and psychiatry on paper kind of seem a lot alike because they're dealing with like a similar organ system, and but the distinction of what the day-to-day looks like is pretty vast. It seems like neurology, there's a lot less talking. It's more emphasis on physical exam, more emphasis on diagnosis, whereas psychiatry is more so trying to build rapport with patients, get to know them, work on treatment plans, and do as much as it's just a little different. But I think the more exposure you can get to the two fields, the more you'll see how different they are. And that should help you decide.
Right. Thank you for that. We can move back to kind of medical school and the grind. We're going to talk about step exams, all the step 1, step 2, BKWC guys. What are your thoughts? How did you prepare really quickly? You don't have to go into that much detail just because, I mean, things are changing right now. So, but you can talk about how you felt during the process.
It's terrible. It's horrible. Like,
yeah.
who likes it? Like, let's just be real. It's the worst experience of your life. But, you know, the thing is, you get past it. You
Get through it.
Yep.
You get through it. We're all here.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
All got through it.
And I think whatever struggles you have with academics or testing, they don't define you. I think if anything, they have the ability to make you stronger because you have overcome something. And also they provide an opportunity for you to learn more about yourself and learn where your weaknesses are and learn how to adapt. So, and I think, aren't there changes being made with step 1 in terms of it being piecemeal that way a while ago? But, you know,
Yeah.
that's good. I think that's a good thing.
Okay.
Yeah, so for me, I basically utilized question banks. I just did tons of questions and put tons of pressure on myself, with which in retrospect I would not do and don't recommend. But it's hard to tell someone like, don't put pressure on this test that means so much for your future. You know what I'm saying? But in retrospect, I would definitely tell my younger self, like, don't put so much pressure. It's not worth it. It's not worth all the stress and the emotion. But I don't know how to tell someone that because I did it, but I'm telling you. But yeah, I just did question banks, and my initial, so I ended up doing step 1 and level 1 because I'm in osteopathic school. So the tests are a little different in that with complex 1 or level 1, we have osteopathic OMM, osteopathic manipulative medicine questions on ours. So there's just a little extra studying, and the wording for the questions are a bit different. So you really have to learn both exams and use two different question banks to really do well on both. My performance wasn't where I wanted to be for level 1 and step 1, but it didn't hinder me because I matched. So, but I definitely would encourage anyone out there studying to just write out a plan that works for you and don't deter from it, because you're going to hear your friends, you're going to hear classmates saying they're doing this, they're doing that, and you're going to start questioning like what you're doing, or second guessing what you're doing and wondering if you're doing the right thing. So just stick to whatever you decide to do and just go for it.
There's also a lot of test prep programs. I went to PASS program in Illinois, and it was awesome. I loved it. It was great for test taking strategies. I have so many memories from going there, and just little like keys, like major keys for test taking. So they have programs like that. I would encourage people to look for them, ask for recommendations, and don't be afraid to use them.
And then Nicholas, did you have anything to add before we move on?
I just want to echo what Keanu and Courtney said. You know, this test really doesn't define you. As much pressure is put on it, and you know, like Keanu said, it's easy to say, like in retrospect, oh, I shouldn't have put as much pressure on it. But I think in some ways, the pressure is kind of what pushes you to do as well as you end up doing on the test. And you know, whether you get your desired score or not, it's just another test. You got to get through it, and you know, it's great. It's not great, but
it's terrible.
Someone enjoyed it.
Once you get through it, you will feel so much better. Just
Yes.
walking out of that test, like as much as it was like one of the lowest points for me, walking out of the test was probably one of the best days for me. Because once it was done, it was like, and that was it.
It's just like, well,
as for advice, you know,
yeah,
everyone
they keep coming to
question banks, first aid, stuff like that, and just like I said, make a plan and stick to it. Like you got this far, you can only do what works for you at this point, and don't let other people bother you with whatever they're doing. Just stick to what you and figure out what you need to do.
I do have some advice for step 3. So
yes, please.
take it as possible. Don't wait, because the longer, especially if you're in something that's not like medicine, internal medicine or family medicine, like take it as soon as possible, because the deeper you get into your training, the more you're going to forget. And step 3 is very much, it's different than the other two. I barely remember step 2. I don't know why I don't remember. I remember going to Philadelphia, and that's about it.
Trauma. Yeah.
Step 3, I do remember though, because it was very different. And it's a lot of like research phase trial questions. So knowing like the trials, knowing how to read articles and assess an article or a pharmaceutical like rep label. It's like a lot of analyzing material, and it wasn't at all like step 1 or step 2, in my opinion. And there might have been some management questions, but I distinctly remember the biostats, the reading labels, reading research, phases of trials. I had about like 10. I feel like I had like 10 or more questions on like phases of trials. I'm like, oh, okay. And then the CS portion of it is new and unusual as well. I use UWorld for that. The cases that they have on UWorld are pretty solid. And yeah, UWorld is always
okay. Nice.
Take it as soon
when you say early, do you mean like in the fall of your intern year, or by December of your intern year? Like what do you mean exactly?
I would say take it within the first year. You don't have to be.
Okay, so anytime intern year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Try to take it within the first year. And a lot of people don't want to use their vacation time during
The
their
study.
intern year because it's so valued.
Mm-hmm.
But it really does take a weight off of you for the rest of your training. And then depending on what program you're in, I think it helps you with like being able to have your own medical license. And then moonlighting, I don't know if you have to take step 3 first before you moonlight, that might be a thing. So yeah, take it as soon as
Sure.
possible.
Can you define for us what moonlighting means?
Moonlighting. So my understanding of moonlighting is when you are working more hours outside of the residency curriculum in order to make more money. So you're picking up extra shifts. And depending on what specialty you're in, it's possible. If you're in a specialty where you're working close to 100 hours a week or whatever that ACGME guideline is or limit, I think 80 hours a week.
I think it's 80.
80, right?
Yeah.
100.
We worked a lot. Some weeks were 100, others were 70,
Unofficial, yeah. Right.
But if you're in a program where you're taking up most of those hours, you're not going to be able to moonlight. So if you're working 40 hours a week, there's a possibility that you can moonlight.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you guys for that. I took notes for that step 3 because I'm still trying to figure all of that out too.
Yeah.
I took notes too.
Hey.
Right, me too. I did as well. I'm gearing up.
Oh man.
Exams
All right,
never end.
What's up?
So the exams never end. So
yeah, they don't ever
They
end.
don't.
Yeah. Just get used to it.
Let's move on to M3, M4 year. So we're talking about your core rotations. So you guys kind of talked about, you guys all really touched on that a little bit already, but how did you approach it? How did you excel in your rotations? Did you do away rotations your M4 year? And yeah, essentially Ashley was asking as well, like, how do you stand out during your psychiatry rotation and make a good impact? So I know there's a lot of questions, but it's all related to M3, M4 year. Just reflect on that.
So I would definitely say show up on time. Number one, if you are on any like medicine rotations or doing like floor work, I would show up early so you can pre-round on your patients that are assigned to you. Know as much as possible about your patients, because you never know what questions your attending is going to ask you in round. So just dive in. I always practice my presentation before we rounded. So I had a more, I was just like a little more concise, and I knew what I was going to say, even though most of the time it didn't come out that way, but I at least knew where I was trying to go with my presentations. So practice those. And other ways to stand out, ask for feedback. Regularly, I would ask for feedback at the end of every week. That was just I just asked like almost every Friday or Saturday, like, okay, how do you think I'm doing? And I made sure I improved upon whatever was suggested the following week. And also, don't leave early unless you're a resident or you're attending say you can leave early, like leave when everyone else leaves. And on your psychiatry rotation specifically, the only thing I may have done differently was just ask to like go see some of the patients that we had rounded on in the morning, like a little more often than I would have like on any other rotation. I just went back to just like follow up with patients based on things that they may have mentioned when we did our morning round. So I did a more follow up with patients.
And Kiana, did you practice your presentations with a resident or just with yourself?
So initially it was with the residents, so I can just like get the style of the attending down packed. And then once I had the style, and I usually write it out like just a template, so I knew what format to follow. And then once I got that with the residents, I would do it on my own.
Courtney, do you have anything from what you remember of M3, M4 year? Okay, if you don't.
I would say I echo what Kiana said. Definitely show up on time. Definitely don't leave early. I would say that it was really, for me specifically, I think it was really challenging to go from Sophie Davis to New York Medical College, because now Sophie Davis, this combined BSMD program, is one medical school. When I was there, we had to transfer or match into a cooperating medical school. So I went into my third and fourth year not knowing anyone, except for I think 5 other, they were all females, the 5 other girls who transferred in, and I wasn't with any of them for any of my rotations. So I think it's a huge transition to go from, sitting in a classroom to being in the hospital. And I think that even if you don't transfer to another school, it's a big transition. I think as a medical student, it's hard to know what your place is, and it's hard to feel useful, and hard to not feel like, you're a burden. It's like, how should I, are they really listening to me? I think that was a big thing. So I would just say ask as many questions as possible to try to figure out what your role should be. Yeah, because the worst thing is when you're like, oh, I want to learn about this patient, and then you feel like you're bugging the resident or the intern who has so much to do. So just really try to be mindful of what your role can be and how you could be useful, because medical students are super useful. You just have to sometimes ask, because it won't be told to you, like, oh, do X, Y, and Z.
And Courtney, with your perspective as a resident, I know it's general surgery, but did you feel like those medical students were pestering you when they were talking to you at times, or?
I mean, it was surgery, right? So like an intern year is really hard. I really enjoyed the medical students. I was probably one of the more social people that I knew of in surgery. And so I enjoyed talking to them and stuff like that. But at the same time, you have a lot to do. So in surgery, I guess there were definitely high stress times where I felt like I can't be responsible for teaching anyone right now. I just need you to help me out. And I would ask, I'd be like, okay, I need you to go see this patient, come back, we'll talk about it, then we'll go see them together and all that kind of thing. So I think it was more annoying for me when students would sit around and do nothing, honestly. Yeah, that was definitely more annoying. It would be better when, they're in and out, doing stuff, busy, trying to help. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. Just, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, there you have it.
Do you have any perspectives on M3, M4 year?
I mean, to echo what was already said, showing up on time, not leaving early, absolute keys should be no brainer. Practicing does help a lot. I'd also really make sure you're paying attention during rounds. That was some advice that was given to me, unsolicited, but just really pay attention, see what they're doing for each patient.
Yeah.
Learn exactly why, what they're doing, and you learn, ask questions to figure out why we're doing certain things. But 2, when you're paying attention, you're taking notes, it gives you an opportunity to follow up on those exact tasks later. So if rounds end at 11 o'clock or whatever, come after lunch, you can follow up and see what was done, what was not, and you might pick up something that your resident missed. And helping out your resident will go a lot further than you trying to show off and around, promote some obscure fact that isn't entirely helpful sometimes, but following one of those things that actually need to get done for patients, that's what shows that you're paying attention and will help you go above it. And then particular to psych, I'd say, I think psych was a unique rotation in that I think med students actually get to do a little bit more, because it's there aren't procedures in psych. It's mostly based around talking to patients, interviewing patients, calling collateral, stuff like that. And I think those are tasks that you can really get involved in as a med student that show that you're taking initiative to do something.
Okay.
Nice.
Do you have something to say, Nelson?
I was saying nice, and there are questions in the chat that we could ask as well, but we are on the roll about third year, so.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to move on to kind of the latter or middle part or beginning part of M4 year. I don't know, it's kind of weird. It's a weird schedule, but
Yeah.
application process, and then after that we'll kind of touch back on some of the questions on the chat. But I wanted to make sure we got that out of the way. So what, like, is there anything in particular about psych that is like you need to consider when you're applying to residency? Like, do you have to do a ways, letter of recommendations, like mentors, all that stuff? Like, what do you feel like plays a huge role in your application process?
So I don't think there are any particulars for psychiatry in general. I know for myself, I needed that away rotation, right, to confirm that psychiatry was for me. But a lot of psychiatry applications require, well, residency programs require 2 letters of recommendations from psychiatrists. So that was a plus that I actually got to do that AI, because if I didn't, there were a lot of programs I wouldn't have even been able to apply to. So I do think doing at least 1 extra rotation in psychiatry will help your application out a lot. Yeah, that's the only thing that kind of stands out.
And Kiana, can you define what an AI is?
So an audition well,
internship is what I see in the chat. I was like,
okay, yeah. I was like, yeah, so an audition, sub-I AI audition internship is a rotation that you do during your 4th year where you take on the role as an intern. So you're kind of like, one of the interns on the rotation. So you take up a little more responsibility than you would have, than you would as a 3rd year. And it's just an opportunity to just show your the residents that you're working with and the attendings, the work that you're learning. You're really working as a team player, and you are more involved with like the plan, or at least I felt like I was more involved with like the plans for patients as a 4th year doing AIs than during 3rd year.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Nicholas.
Yeah, I guess in terms of the application, letters are obviously very, very important. But I think in terms of electives, I would say the impression I got, at least from my interviews, was like they want to see that you're doing psych electives and that you're interested in psych. They don't necessarily need to be a ways, but they're also interested in like you having broader exposure as well. So one of my electives that I talked about during my interviews a lot was actually an elective I took in narrative medicine. And it was like non-clinical, and we just basically sat around, like read a bunch of passages together, and we discussed a lot of things, and we watched the movies and talked about it. But that was one experience that I got to talk to, and it kind of shows that there's more depth in like you just diving into like one specialty. Like you're interested in other things, and that's also what they want to see.
That's a cool elective, narrative medicine. I've never heard of that. That's really cool.
Yeah, no, it was awesome. Yeah.
Watch movies, sign me up.
Yeah.
Oh man. Courtney, did you have anything to add for that?
I definitely agree with what both of them have said, Kiana and Nicholas. Definitely being well-rounded, I think, goes a long way in psychiatry. Anything that could make you more able to relate to the different types of patients that you're going to be treating and interacting with. I think that's something really unique about psychiatry, is there's a huge emphasis on humanities. So if you can do anything that broadens your worldliness, you know, your how close you are to people and how you understand people, I think that benefits you.
Awesome. And then if we can talk a little bit more about like how many programs you applied to, if you're comfortable sharing, and how you kind of selected the programs that you ended up applying to.
I did another weird thing in my journey where so I was very much interested in psychiatry, and then specifically population medicine and public health. So I dual applied, and I was very candid with everyone that I interviewed with that I was applying for psychiatry as well as preventive medicine, which is like a field that hardly anyone
Yeah.
knows about. So I could talk for hours about the whole process. Be concise. So I dual applied to both. I think between the two, I applied to about 45 programs. The preventive medicine side, it was way less. I think it was about 15, because not many people know about it. And you also need an intern year prior to going into preventive medicine. So it's a smaller pool of people. And then because preventive medicine is not within the NRMP match, they use a SAP process, which is really friendly for the applicant. You don't have to rely on a computer system completely to determine where you go, and you have, should I say, negotiating power? It feels like negotiating power because you're talking to the programs after the first round, where the first round is determined by a computer. The program picks their number one choice, and if that number one choice picked the program, you go there. And then after that, the programs call up applicants that they like, and then the applicant speaks directly with the program. So, and it happens earlier than the NRMP match. So because of the way that all worked out, when I was applying and interviewing, I had a top 3 programs where I wanted to go. And so before I could finish interviewing all the places that I had interviews at, I had applied or interviewed at 6 places, 3 psych and 3 preventive medicine. And I had like an early offer from one of the preventive medicine places. And so I don't know, I had a lot of negotiating and like figuring out of things to do. So I only interviewed at 3 psych and 3 preventive medicine.
When you said negotiating, I was like, ooh, I get to take your salary or something. Like I need to get more.
Yeah.
They don't give you that much.
I was thinking that too.
No. But it's more like trying to figure out, I want to go here, but I have this deadline for this program, but this program said that they liked me. And then because they're allowed to, you're allowed to talk to program in the SAP process versus the NRMP process. So it was it's different. Definitely not standard.
So for me, when I was applying for programs, I knew the geographic area that I wanted to stay in. So once I narrowed that down, and that was pretty much on the East Coast, I then tried to figure out if there were states that I'd prefer to live in versus others. And once I kind of narrowed that down, then I looked at most programs that were in those states. I applied to about 80 programs. That's a lot. But the reason why I applied to so many was because my board scores weren't the strongest. So I knew that I had to be very strategic about the programs or the number of programs that I applied to. And then also, this was the first year that the allopathic and osteopathic schools were going into the same match. So I had extra schools or extra programs because of that reason as well. So I just wanted to make sure I maximized my chances of matching. So I just applied to about 80 programs, spent a lot of money with that application fee. But it was worth it. I ended up accepting about 11 interviews. One thing I must say, during the accepting interviews from programs process, it's like a game, you know, like you get these invites while you're on your rotations and you have to step out of the room to accept interviews. And it's a really hard process. So I ended up missing a couple because I didn't get out the room on time, you know, so that's just an annoying thing about the whole interview process. But besides that, yeah, so 80 programs and spent a lot of money, traveled as north as New York State, and then as far south as Florida. So there was airfare involved. Some programs paid for hotels, most didn't, but everyone provided dinner the night before. So that was a great plus on saving some money. And if I had any states where I knew people, or if I was like within a 30-minute drive, I asked if I could stay at friends or family members' houses to save some money along the way too.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Nicholas, did you have anything else to add to it?
Yeah, I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
We're just talking about I know there's a bunch of stuff to talk about. The number of programs you apply to, interviews you got, that process.
Yeah, okay. Right, so I applied to 46 programs in total. How I selected them was mainly based on geography, but I would say like choose your own priorities, like what matters most to you. Do you care where you live? Well, obviously you care where you live, but like, do you care what city it is? Or does it have to be a new city? Do you want to be around family, friends, stuff like that? So for me personally, geography was important, and staying closer to my family was really important to me. So most of the places I applied to were in the Northeast, and then the rest were along the East Coast, based on programs that I looked at that I thought would be kind of a good fit based on what I was interested in going into. And that's also another thing to look at. Try to figure out if there are particular areas of psychiatry that interest you more, or certain populations that interest you more that you want to work with, and then find programs that will kind of tailor to that need, because not every program will have everything. Yeah, accepting interviews is hard, as was mentioned. They will email you at random times. I think across all the interviews I had to use about 5 different scheduling platforms, which also didn't help the situation, because they get an email, when you log in ERAS will tell you go somewhere else, and it's a whole mess.
Yeah.
So just be prepared for all of that. Try to be as on top of it as you can, and if you know you can't be on your phone 24/7, because obviously we're all busy, maybe you can get somebody else to help you out. I know I asked my girlfriend at least once or twice to just man my email while I was doing something else. And, you know, if you get something, just respond yes, and I'll sort out the details when and where later. Like, you know, because you can always cancel.
That's trust. That email, woo, that's trust.
You gotta hide.
I'll be out there snooping like, ooh.
Oh man. Okay, there was a question on the chat, and I think this is a great question because I don't know what to do when I go to conferences and stuff and talking to residency programs.
Networking questions, yeah.
So this person says, I'm attending a psychiatry-related conference this weekend. What are some important questions to be asking program directors at conferences?
They're attending one? Like they're going somewhere?
That was the next question.
Yeah. I'm hoping virtually, Ashley. All you out here. Wash your hands, stay home.
They just outed themselves right there.
I'm assuming virtually. There have been some virtual conferences going on, so let's just Zoom and hope for the best.
Yeah.
I think there is the APA is this weekend.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
If you're interested in talking to program directors at a conference, I would say research their program first and kind of form questions based off things that you read online that you're actually interested in. Because that would be my advice.
Great advice.
But I also think it's okay to like say that you have no idea what's going on with I think she's an M3 based off of her questions. So like
Okay.
Going in as an M3. So you said it's a virtual conference, y'all. Okay, good. I think it's a lot of times it's okay. I don't know if you guys have any hesitations, but like to go up and be like, hey, I'm like still looking around. I don't know. Like part of their job is to inform you about the opportunities that are at their program. So I don't know that you necessarily, especially if it's that setup like of a residency fair, I don't think that it's completely necessary to like know every detail about them. I think it's part of their job to show up and say, you should come to my program for this reason. I don't know, that's my input there.
Yeah, I would say as someone who definitely gets nervous prior to like talking to people or meeting people for the first time, I would say just put yourself out there, just do it. Just introduce yourself, ask questions about the program, have conversations with people. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. I think it's definitely helpful. I don't think I've had a bad experience with going up to someone and talking to someone during a conference. It also helps if you have friends or mentors or someone that's in the field that you're in who can then introduce you to people. So that's where I think the importance of mentors comes in also, is for conferences when, Corona's over and we can actually go out. Going to conferences with people and having them introduce you is a great way to meet people. I met a lot of people that way. And then remembering that mentorship goes both ways. So like someone helped you, eventually you should help other people. It's just as beneficial for you to be a mentor as it is to be mentored.
I have nothing to add. She just got it all.
Yeah. And if the interaction is awkward, the mentor just kind of pause and act like the connection froze, and then just exit out.
That's a good one.
Okay. Yeah. Does anyone? I kind of want to be respectful of time. Does anyone have anything else they kind of want to add? Give advice to pre-meds, medical students, and then we'll kind of finish up from there.
Soon to be interns.
I'll piggyback off of what Courtney just mentioned, just briefly. Like, mentorship really is life. I didn't realize how important it is to have a mentor, especially when you come from, well, I'll speak for myself. I came from a background where I didn't see physicians that looked like me, had no physicians in my family. I came from a background where from a lower socioeconomic background. So it was just like, it wasn't what I was used to. And once I found my mentors, it was like everything just started to fall in line. They didn't hold my hand throughout the process. They just said, hey, this is what I think you should do. Every suggestion I did, and eventually got to medical school. So if you find a mentor, hold on to your mentor. But as Courtney said, it's two ways. You gotta do your part as well.
Does anyone else have anything to add?
Just during the interview process, and when you're starting out, whenever you're in a new situation or a situation where you're initially uncomfortable, just remember to be yourself. And you got where you are because of who you are and what you've done so far. So trust in that and just try to be as authentic as possible and work hard, and it'll be okay. You'll get through the rough parts.
Yeah.
Really nothing else to add. Just
that's fine. Yeah.
It's good advice all around.
Yeah, this has been great. Do you guys have anything that you want to pub? Anything before we drop out? Like, in terms of anything that you're working on, any side projects, any Instagram handles or whatever?
IG handles?
Yeah.
Get them followers up.
We can put them in the description below, but
chat.
Is there anything else? All right.
No, nothing else. Best of luck to everyone who's watching and wherever part of the med school process journey you're in, or starting internship, wherever you are, best of luck. And I'm available if anyone ever needs any advice or any tips for where you are in your journey.
Yay. Thank you guys. We're gonna end
Thank
it
you all
here.
so much. Stay
You're
safe out
welcome.
there.
Thanks
Stay
for
safe,
having
y'all. Wash
us.
your hands. Don't go out. Okay. We're gonna stop it now. Bye.
Bye, guys.